There is a moment. Most women know it, even if they have never spoken it aloud. It comes quietly, without announcement, usually not during a dramatic ending or a tearful goodbye. It comes in an ordinary moment. Maybe you are washing dishes late at night, or driving home from somewhere that felt emptier than expected, or lying beside someone who is asleep while you stare at the ceiling in the dark and something moves through you. Not sadness exactly, not anger, something older than both of those, something that has been waiting a very long time to be acknowledged. And it says, without words, without theatre, simply and completely, this is not it, not him specifically, not this apartment or this life or this version of Tuesday, something larger and quieter and more essential than any of those things. This is not the life that belongs to me. That moment is where this story begins. Not at the end of a relationship, at the beginning of a woman finding her way back to herself. And what I want to tell you today is something that most people, even people who love you, are not going to say. The woman who chooses to live alone, who does not have a boyfriend, who is not looking for a partner, who moves through her life with a quiet completeness that makes other people uncomfortable, she is not broken. She is not hiding. She is not damaged or cold or secretly devastated behind a composed face. She has simply undergone something that Jung called the most important journey a human being can take. Think about how early it starts. The performance. You probably do not remember the first time you made yourself smaller to keep someone else comfortable. It was too long ago. Maybe it was a classroom where you stopped raising your hand because the boys got called on first and something in the room told you that confidence was less attractive than quiet. Maybe it was a dinner table where your feelings were called too much, too sensitive, too dramatic, and you learned to fold yourself into something more manageable. Maybe it was the first relationship where you translated his moods, absorbed his silences, became fluent in the language of someone else's emotional weather, while your own interior life went unexamined and unnamed. Women learn this early. They learn that love is something you earn through adjustment, through being the right temperature. Not too cold, not too demanding, not too much. And for a long time, most women are extraordinarily good at this. They adjust so naturally and so continuously that they lose track of where the adjustment ends and where they actually begin. This is what Jung called the persona, the mask. Not worn with bad intentions, not a lie exactly, but a functional layer between who you are and what the world has told you it needs you to be. The persona is not a failure. It was adaptive. It kept you safe and loved and included in environments where the authentic self might have been penalized. The problem is not that you built it. The problem is what happens when you wear it for so long that you forget what it covers. Most women come to the moment of reckoning not through a single catastrophic event, but through accumulation. It is rarely one relationship that breaks something open. It is the pattern across all of them, the specific way you recognize yourself in each one, the particular thing you always give that is never quite given back. The way you light up when someone finally asks how you are and actually waits for the real answer, because it happens so rarely that it feels like an event. The quiet, creeping awareness that you have been pouring yourself into spaces that were never going to have room for all of you. And then, one day, usually after something that feels like it should not be as significant as it turns out to be, something breaks. Not dramatically. The drama, if it came, already passed, months ago. What breaks now is quieter. It is the part of you that was still hoping, still extending the benefit of the doubt, still telling yourself that the next version of this situation would be different if you just gave it a little more time, a little more patience, a little more of whatever part of yourself you had not yet tried offering. That hope breaks, and in the silence after it breaks, the real story begins. Jung wrote that the shadow is not the opposite of who we are. It is the part of who we are that we have been told not to show. The desires that were called selfish, the needs that were called demanding, the boundaries that were called walls, the parts of you that were too loud, too soft, too honest, too complicated for the relationships you were trying to maintain. Every time you suppressed one of those parts, it did not disappear. It went into the shadow. It accumulated there, in the dark, getting heavier, getting louder in your body even when your words stayed quiet. The woman who chooses to live alone, who has decided to move through her life without a partner until or unless something genuinely worthy of her presence itself, that woman has almost always had a confrontation with her shadow, a real one. Not a theoretical journaling talking about it in therapy confrontation, but the kind that happens in the middle of the night when there is no one to perform for and the mask comes off entirely, and you see, perhaps for the first time with complete clarity, the distance between who you have been performing and who you actually are. That confrontation is terrifying, and it is the beginning of everything real. Let me describe something specific, because I think the way people talk about women who choose to be alone misses the texture of what the experience actually is. It is not that she woke up one morning and decided she was too good for relationships. It is not that she became afraid of love or bitter about men or resigned to some smaller, lonelier version of a life. The story is so much more interior than that, so much more specific. She spent years, most of us do, learning to translate love in the language it was offered rather than the language she actually needed it in. She learned to feel grateful for almost presence, for being cared about in the way the other person knew how to care, even when that way left the deepest parts of her completely untouched. She learned to take less and call it enough. She learned to notice when she was being genuinely seen and to make that moment last as long as possible in her memory, because those moments were rarer than she admitted to herself. And she was good at the translation, so good that most of the people in her life did not know how much was being lost in it, how much of her actual experience was going unexpressed, unnamed, unshared, because she was always warm, always present, always the person who made space for everyone else. And that warmth was real. The care was real. The love was real. What was also real, underneath all of it, was the exhaustion of being known mostly as what you provide rather than who you are. There is a specific kind of loneliness that only happens inside relationships. It is different from the loneliness of being physically alone. It is the loneliness of being with someone and feeling yourself disappear inside the connection, of giving your full attention and your full emotional presence and returning home to yourself afterward, if you return at all, slightly less than before. Jung called this kind of self-loss the dissolution of the ego in the unconscious of another. The way you can become so absorbed in another person's emotional world that your own becomes a foreign country you can no longer quite find your way back to. Women are more vulnerable to this than they are ever told, because the very qualities that make them extraordinary in relationships, the attunement, the empathy, the deep desire for connection, those are also the qualities that make them most at risk of losing themselves inside relationships that do not offer the same in return. And most relationships do not. Not because the people in them are bad, but because most people have not done the internal work that genuine reciprocity requires. The woman who chooses to live alone has usually loved several people with everything she had. That is an important thing to understand. She did not arrive at her solitude through fear of love or indifference to connection. She arrived here through love, through loving enough to finally understand the difference between love and the performance of love, between being chosen and being kept, between genuine intimacy and the comfortable arrangement of two people who have stopped surprising each other. She is not afraid of love. She is afraid of the specific and particular way she loses herself inside it when it is not real, and she has learned, at significant cost, to tell the difference. Jung described something he called the anima, the inner feminine principle that lives in every human psyche, the part that carries the capacity for depth, for feeling, for connection that transcends the rational. In women, this is not the anima, but the deeper self, the self beneath all the adaptation, beneath all the performance, beneath all the years of making herself useful and palatable and appropriate, the self that has not been fully expressed in any relationship she has ever had, not because it was not wanted, but because it was never fully safe. Here is a question I want you to sit with. When was the last time you were in a relationship where the deepest, most complicated, most contradictory version of you was welcome? Not the version that had its emotions together, not the version that knew how to make things easier, the full version, the one that sometimes has no answer, the one that grieves things that should be over, the one that gets angry in ways that are inconvenient and sad, in ways that are not photogenic and afraid, in ways that cannot be fixed with reassurance, the version that takes up a genuine amount of space. For most women, the honest answer is rarely, maybe once, maybe never fully. And here is what that absence does over time. It does not just leave a need unmet. It teaches you to stop expecting to be met. It trains you gradually and completely to translate your own experience into something smaller and simpler before you offer it to another person. Because you have learned through experience that the full version lands too hard, takes up too much, makes the people you love uncomfortable or overwhelmed or distant in the specific way that signals you have asked for too much against. You edit, you condense, you present the version that is digestible, and you tell yourself, this is maturity, this is compromise, this is how love actually works in the real world, not in the fantasy version, but in the actual architecture of two human beings trying to coexist. But it is not maturity, it is disappearance. And the woman who chooses to live alone has usually reached the specific, bone-deep point of understanding that disappearing inside a relationship is a more complete kind of loneliness than living alone will ever be. Jung's concept of individuation is often described as the process of becoming fully yourself. What they are actually watching is a woman in the most important process of her life, not falling apart, integrating, not shutting love out, becoming for perhaps the first time genuinely capable of a love that does not require her to disappear inside it. The shadow work that precedes this is not discussed enough. The actual interior reckoning of a woman who is choosing herself. It is not peaceful. It is not a montage of morning yoga and solo travel and growing confidence. It is sitting alone at 2 a.m. with the specific grief of every version of yourself that you let someone else's needs make smaller. It is looking at the pattern across every relationship you have ever had and recognizing your own contribution to it. Not to blame yourself, but to understand the unconscious logic that kept you in arrangements that consistently left the deepest part of you untouched. Jung said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That sentence is not a spiritual concept for this woman. It is a clinical description of something she lived, the way she kept finding herself in the same emotional architecture with different men. The way her instincts and her choices seemed to be working at cross purposes, choosing people she was drawn to and then being hurt by the exact qualities that drew her over and over in slightly different configurations. That pattern does not end through better decision-making at the conscious level. It ends when you go into the unconscious logic underneath your choices and understand what need was being served by the pattern. What old wound was being revisited? What childhood emotional contract was being reenacted? What part of you believed, despite all surface-level evidence to the contrary, that this time the outcome would be different? The woman who has done this work is different, not in a way she would necessarily describe with those words. She would probably just say she knows herself better now. She would say she trusts herself differently. She would say something shifted and she no longer recognizes herself in the choices she used to make without even noticing she was making them. But from the outside, what is most visible is the stillness, the lack of urgency, the way she moves through the social world of romance and coupling without the anxiety that most people carry around being without a partner. Not because she does not want love, but because she has separated the concept of love from the concept of proof. She no longer needs a relationship to prove to herself or anyone else that she is lovable. And without that need driving the engine becomes very quiet. And quiet, in a world that runs on romantic urgency, is deeply unsettling to people who have not yet found it in themselves. Here is the uncomfortable truth that this kind of woman represents to the world around her. She is living evidence that the story most of us were told, that completion comes from the right relationship, that a woman without a partner is a woman waiting for her life to really begin, is not just incomplete. It is, for women who have done this particular interior work, demonstrably false. She is not waiting. She is here, completely, without apology or performance, in her own life, with herself, and she is not suffering in the way the narrative said she would be. That is threatening, genuinely threatening. Not in a dramatic sense, but in the quiet way that reality is always threatening to the stories we need to be true. The person who is happy in the way you were told you could not be happy without something you do not have, that person is not a challenge to your choices. But they feel like one, because they are living proof that a different set of terms is possible. And that possibility, if you let yourself really look at it, requires you to examine everything you have accepted about your own life. This is why she makes people uncomfortable, not because she is cold or arrogant or secretly heartbroken, because she is genuinely at peace. And peace that does not require the thing most people believe is necessary for peace is the most quietly revolutionary thing a person can be. I want to tell you something about what she still carries, because I think the story gets told too cleanly sometimes, as though the woman who chooses herself stops longing for things, stops having nights where the silence is heavy rather than nourishing, stops occasionally wanting the specific warmth of being held by someone who knows her completely. She does not stop wanting those things. She has not become an island. She has become someone who can hold both the wanting and the wholeness at the same time, without one negating the other. She can want love and not need it to be okay. She can feel the longing and not let it make her accept less than she knows she deserves. She can be moved by the possibility of genuine connection without becoming desperate for its arrival. This is what Jung meant by the integration of opposites, not the elimination of longing, but the capacity to contain it without being driven by it. The woman who has truly individuated does not stop being human. She stops being controlled by the parts of her humanity that were born in fear rather than truth. She knows what she wants now. And it is specific in a way it was not before. Before, she would have called wanting warmth and stability and someone who understood her. Those are not wrong desires, but they are general enough to be filled by almost anyone who performs them adequately. What she wants now is more interior than that. She wants someone who has done their own descent, someone who has met their shadow and come back from it without pretending the journey did not change them, someone who can be present with her in the full, complicated, contradictory reality of who she is, because they have been that present with themselves. She is not looking for perfection. She is looking for someone who has chosen truth over comfort in themselves the way she has chosen it in herself. And she knows, with a clarity that used to feel like loneliness and now feels more like integrity, that this is rare. That most people have not done this work. That most relationships operate on the persona level. Two edited versions of two people maintaining a comfortable enough performance that nobody has to look too directly at what is underneath. She cannot do that anymore, not because she is better than anyone who can, but because she has seen what is underneath her own performance, and she cannot pretend it does not exist. And a relationship that requires that pretense would cost her the most important thing she has built. The woman who lives alone without a boyfriend has answered that question. Not for every woman, not as a prescription, but for herself, with complete honesty about the cost and the reward of both options. She has chosen the full version of herself, and that choice made with open eyes and a heart that still wants love but no longer needs it to be complete. That is not a closing. It is the most profound opening possible, because only from wholeness can you genuinely receive love. Only from knowing yourself can you be genuinely known. Only from choosing yourself fully and without apology can you be chosen in a way that actually means something. She is not waiting for her life to begin. She is already in it, completely, unapologetically, in the only life that was ever truly hers. And when love comes, if it comes, it will not find someone who was incomplete without it. It will find someone who was whole enough to receive it without disappearing inside it. And that is the love worth waiting for. Not the love that saves you, the love that meets you right here, exactly as you are, in the full, complicated, luminous, unedited truth of who you have finally allowed yourself to become.